Three people, three different nights, and three things that refuse to stay dead. Each one still reaches across the line between the living and the lost. Welcome to the Black Hour Stories. Tonight's episode brings you three true ghost encounters you'll never forget. These aren't legends or movie plots. They happen to ordinary people who swear what they saw was real. Let's begin with the first story. Story 1. The Motel Mirror. Kayla didn't plan to stop in that town. She'd been driving 12 hours straight, cutting through empty desert between Texas and New Mexico, the kind of landscape that makes you forget you're still on Earth. The sun was a dull orange bruise sinking behind the mesas when her check engine light started flashing. The next gas station was 30 miles away, so she turned off the highway when she saw the old sign, Ravenwood Motel, Vacancy. The office smelled like dust and lemon cleaner. A fan spun lazily behind the counter. The man working there didn't look up when she came in. He just slid a paper form toward her and said, "Room 7, don't mind the mirror." She thought he was joking. The line delivery felt half asleep, but when she got to her room she understood why he said it. The place looked like a museum of things no one wanted anymore. Faded carpet, cigarette burns on the dresser, a Bible warped from old water damage, and on the far wall above the dresser was a massive mirror, too big for a motel. The frame was black wood, carved with looping shapes that almost looked like vines, or letters from an alphabet she didn't know. The glass itself was flawless, no scratches, no fog. It reflected the entire room in crisp detail. She set her bag down and saw something strange in the reflection. Her suitcase had landed half open, a red scarf hanging out, but in the mirror, the scarf wasn't there. The rest of the reflection matched perfectly, but not that small bit of color. When she looked down at the real scarf, it was still there, spilling out across the carpet. She glanced up again. Gone in the mirror. She laughed nervously. Probably lighting, she thought. Desert sunset messing with her eyes. She shut the curtains and turned on the lamp. The room turned dull and still again. When she looked once more, the scarf had returned in the reflection, right where it should be. That night, wind scraped along the windows. The air conditioner rattled like someone kicking a metal pipe. Kayla drifted off, still wearing her sweatshirt, her phone face down beside her. She dreamed she was standing in front of that mirror, brushing her hair. Only her reflection wasn't copying her movements. It was running its hand along the glass, like it was feeling for a door. She woke to a tap, then another. The sound came from the direction of the dresser. She turned on the lamp. The mirror was dark, catching only a thin slice of her face in the light. Something behind the glass seemed to move, slow, watery shapes, as if someone was standing just on the other side. She whispered, "Hello?" Then immediately regretted saying anything. The tapping came again, faster, desperate. She grabbed her keys and tried to open the door, but the lock jammed. The air in the room grew heavier, hotter. In the mirror, the reflection began to twist, the walls stretching like melted wax. Her reflection's face was pale, lips parted in a strange smile. Then a handprint appeared inside the mirror, not on the surface but inside, as if pressed from another world. The palm slid downward, smearing faint gray streaks. Kayla's stomach turned. She backed away until she hit the bed. The reflection stepped forward. Not her, but something using her shape. Its eyes were too dark. Its mouth kept smiling as its head tilted in tiny jerks. Then it raised its hand and tapped once on the inside of the glass. Tap. The light flickered. The sound from the air conditioner turned into a low hum, like someone whispering just below hearing. Kayla shouted for help, but her voice sounded muffled, as though the room itself was swallowing the sound. Then the glass rippled, just a wave across the surface like water disturbed. The reflection pressed both hands against it and leaned closer until its face filled the frame. When it smiled, Kayla saw something white fall from its mouth, teeth one by one, clicking softly against the other side of the glass. She ran to the door again, slamming her shoulder into it. On the third hit, the door gave way. She stumbled outside into cold desert air. The parking lot was empty. Not a single car except hers. The office light was off. She turned to look at the window of her room and froze. Someone was still in there. Her shape stood behind the curtains, faintly outlined by lamplight, moving slowly toward the glass. She didn't go back. She drove through the night until sunrise, stopping only when her gas tank was near empty. She never told anyone about it, not her sister, not her friends. But months later, scrolling through local news, she saw something that made her hands go cold. A short article. Ravenwood Motel closed after guest disappearance. The police photo showed the same door, room 7. The mirror above the dresser was cracked clean down the middle. Beneath the picture, a line from the property manager read, "The mirror's gone missing. We never found who took it." She stared at the screen for a long time before locking her phone. When she looked at her car's side mirror, she caught a flicker, something that looked like her, smiling faintly, but not matching her movement. Story 2. The Snowfield Visitor. Marcus liked the sound of snow settling. It was a soft hiss, like tiny grains pouring into a jar. Up north, where the pines crowded the hills and the road ended in a white line, that sound was his company. He rented a small cabin for the winter, one room and a loft, a wood stove that breathed slow heat, and windows that looked onto a clearing where deer sometimes passed. He took photos for magazines, mostly animals and weather. He liked things that didn't pose. The days were short and white, the nights were long and blue. He fell into a rhythm. Wake before dawn, check the sky, check the temperature, sling the camera over his shoulder and go looking for tracks. Sometimes fox, sometimes rabbit, sometimes a single line of grouse feet, little commas curving toward the shivering creek. His boots squeaked on the crusted snow, and his breath rose in slow smoke. He found them on the 11th morning. Small prints, bare, 5 toes and a soft groove at the heel. They started at the edge of the clearing as if someone had stepped down out of the air. No leading path, no sign of a shoe. He crouched and pressed one gloved hand beside a print. The toes were as long as his, but thinner. The skin had made a smooth shine on the snow, as if the foot had been cold enough to frost its own outline. They went straight into the trees, neat and steady. He followed one careful step after another, camera dangling, eyes scanning for any movement. The woods were quiet. Pines held snow like white caps. A jay shouted once and then nothing. The prints never broke or stumbled, just a perfect chain crossing a small drift skirting an oak, crossing a frozen creek that rang under his weight like a dull bell. After a quarter mile, the prints stopped. They ended in the middle of a wide field where wind had scoured the snow to glass. Marcus circled the area twice. Nothing. No return line, no scramble, no sign of a fall, as if the walker had kept going into a white overhead. He took 3 photos, wide, mid, close, his breath feathering the lens each time. He headed back as the cold bit harder. It was that deep cold that gets into your fingertips even with thick gloves. He saw his own path in the snow behind him and felt better, a human line going back home. But when the cabin came into view, yellow light under the eaves, smoke from the stove, he saw another path next to his. A second line, faint but real, running parallel from the field right up to his steps. Bare feet again. 5 toes, thin heel. His stomach went tight, hot against the cold. He kept moving. He didn't look left or right. Inside, he stamped off his boots and shut the door tight. The stove ticked as the logs settled. Heat wrapped the room with that dry pine sap smell. He set the camera on the table, pulled off his gloves, and held his hands near the iron. It took a long time for the numb to leave. As it did, he noticed another smell, faint, clean, sharp, the smell of new snow right after it falls. It came from the hallway that led to the small bathroom and the back door. He walked the hall. Frost hugged the inside of the window panes like a lattice of white ferns. The back door had a dust of ice along the lock, as if someone had exhaled against it. He touched the knob. It was colder than the air around it, cold enough to sting. He told himself the mind makes patterns out of nothing. The wind cut strange shapes. Ice formed where air leaked. He ate canned soup and warmed his fingers around the bowl. He uploaded the photos, the field, the perfect prints, his own tracks heading home. When he zoomed in, he saw something he hadn't noticed in the field, just at the edge of the close shot, a blur that was not wind. It was tall and thin and shaped like a person, but its edges looked brittle, like a crust of hoar frost blown into a rough figure. He stared until his eyes ached. When he blinked, the screen had a mark on it. 5 pale smudges at the lower right corner, 5 fingertip shapes. He wiped them away with his sleeve, but they stayed. They weren't on the screen, they were on the picture inside the file, as though the cold had burned fingerprints into the pixels. Marcus slept with the stove full and the lights off. Outside, the wind rattled the eaves. At 3 in the morning, the wind died, and the world went deep and still. That was when he heard it. A careful step in the snow, slow and testing, right outside the window by his bed. Then another. Then another. A pause. He held his breath. The stillness pressed on his chest. He smelled that new snow smell again, clean and empty. Something leaned against the glass. The pane made a tiny dry sound, not a crack but a stretch, like ice asking for another degree. Another faint sound followed, close to his ear, breath fogging and clearing. He lay as quiet as he could, socked feet tucked up off the floor, hands flat on his chest. The glass chilled the air around his face. He didn't look. In the morning, the window was beautiful and wrong. A perfect print on the inside. 5 narrow fingers tested against the frost, reaching down to where his head had been. A smudge at the center of the palm. He took a photo on his phone and then turned the stove up high until the pattern melted. But even when it turned to water and ran in thin streams, the finger shapes lingered, like the memory of a grip. The second day's light felt dimmer, even at noon. He strapped on the camera again and followed the new set of prints that now circled the cabin. They were not curious prints. They were patient. They looped the walls, paused at each window, stepped to the edge of the porch and waited. He took no more photos that day. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. That night, the wind did not come back. The snow dampened every far sound. The clock above the stove clicked softly at the minute, and the stovepipe groaned once like an old throat clearing. Marcus set a chair under the latch at the back door. He lay on the bed and did not close his eyes. At 3:10, as if the hour itself were a switch, the breath returned to the window. He sat up and saw his own breath mixed with something else's, 2 fogs rising and falling on either side of the glass. The pane shivered white in a circle, as if a mouth were resting there. His name came out of that circle. The voice was small and had the sound of air frozen in a bottle and then poured out again. He didn't answer. The voice said his name again and waited. The waiting felt longer than the sound. When he didn't respond, the voice moved to the door, and the cold under the frame thickened until his socks crisped with frost. The chair under the latch made a tiny squeal as the wood tightened. He watched the metal turn white at the edges, hoar crystals growing like hair. The next morning there were bare prints in the hall, from the back door past the bathroom, stopping just at the foot of his bed. He did not own feet that small or thin. He crouched and pressed a finger into one print. The snow had not blown in. The print had formed in the grit and dust of the floor, and his finger came away wet and freezing, as if the hole itself were a tiny patch of winter. He should have left then, but the snow came heavy. By noon, a white curtain erased the trees. Travel today would be a slow death. He stayed. He chopped extra wood until his lungs burned. He checked the latch twice. He kept the camera on the table with the lens cap off, a strange kind of comfort. At 3 that afternoon, the storm muffled the world to a hum, white pressed against every window. He could not see his own porch rail. A thunk sounded on the back step, not a knock, a dropped weight. He stood in the hall and watched the crack under the door light to a pale line. When he leaned closer, the light shifted like someone had stepped in front of the drift beyond. He went to the front door instead. He unlatched it, opened it to a slice, and took a single picture into the white. The flash bounced back and made the yard look like a sheet hung 3 inches from his face. When the image appeared on the screen, he saw the clearing as if the storm thinned for the camera. In that thinness stood the figure again, nearer now. It had no face, just 2 round cups of darker air where eyes should be, like the snow there had been scooped and not refilled. The body was narrow as a birch trunk and ended in bare, pale feet that did not sink. He shut the door. He sat on the floor. He waited for night because night meant only one thing at a time. Day stacked fear on chores. At 3:10, the voice spoke through the keyhole. His name pulled into a long shape that did not sound quite human. Then a shorter word, please. Between each word was the sound of air freezing and cracking. Marcus took the chair from the back door and set it aside. He opened the door. Cold hit him like a wall. The clearing was bright with stormlight, though it was full night. The figure stood on the steps, not 3 feet away. Frost grew from it, the way hair grows from skin. No eyes, just those hollow places. No mouth, but a breath spot on the air between them like a glass held up to a cold window. A windless, clean scent filled his head, dizzy and empty. He said his name first just to feel alive. Then he said, "You can't stay." The figure tilted its head. It stepped once into the doorway. The wood under its foot groaned and went white, rhymed in a circle. It did not touch him. It did not move farther in. It stood and listened like someone at a threshold trying to learn a house. His camera was still on the table behind him, open eye toward the hall. Without thinking, he reached and snapped a shot. The flash stuttered. The figure collapsed inward, as if it were made of ash. It blew through him, untouched, and vanished, not by walking, but by falling into the thin seam where warm air meets cold. The breath spot on the air hung for a moment, and then faded. The next morning, the storm was over. Sun made the snow glitter so bright his eyes watered. He stepped out and looked. No fresh prints in the clearing, no marks near the windows. He walked to the field where he had first found the path. The wind had scraped it clean again. He took a final photo, just space, just winter. On his way back, he saw one thing he couldn't explain. At the exact spot where the figure had stood the night before, the top layer of snow had turned to a thin glass. The shape of 2 feet was frozen there, not pressed into the snow, but lifted out of it, like ice had grown in the absence of weight. He touched one with his finger. It was so cold it burned and left a painless numb that lasted all day. He left the cabin the next week. The road was barely clear. He put the photos into a folder he never opened again. The magazines took his animal shots and paid him on time. They called the winter images eerie and beautiful, but not quite useful. He didn't argue. He still wakes at 3:10. He listens to the windows. He tries not to breathe too loud. Sometimes, just before sleep swallows the rest of his hearing, he smells new snow even in deep summer. Sometimes he finds small, wet shapes on the hardwood floor of his apartment, smooth and cold, evaporating before he can show anyone. Sometimes he takes a picture of his own face in the bathroom mirror and sees just over his shoulder a thin space where someone should be, a space that looks like a person cut out of air. He lives on the 12th floor. There's no snow up there, there's no field, no pines, no old stove. But when the wind dies and the building holds still, He can hear a careful step outside his window, slow, testing, patient. A breath finds the glass and leaves a circle. His name slides through it in a voice made of frost. He does not answer. He knows the rule now. At 3:10, no matter where he is, it will always find the shortest path to the warmest room and ask to be let in. He keeps the camera close and the lights on and tells himself over and over that lights are only light and not a door. Story 3. The Cemetery Voice. Lena didn't mind working alone at night. The cemetery was quiet in a way the world rarely was anymore. No cars, no phones, no voices except wind and insects. She liked how the place seemed to breathe, how the trees creaked and sighed, how the stone angels stared through fog as if still keeping watch. She'd been the night groundskeeper at Willowshade Cemetery for almost a year. It was a small fenced property on a rural road in Pennsylvania, tucked behind a church that hadn't held Sunday service in decades. Her job was simple: clear branches, check the lights, lock the maintenance shed, and make sure no one was breaking in to vandalize graves. Most nights, it was peaceful enough to make her forget time. That changed after the rainstorm. It came hard and fast, one of those early spring downpours that seemed to shake the ground. Lightning flashed over the hills, showing the grave markers in sharp white bursts. Lena watched from her truck, wipers flapping, until the worst passed. Around midnight, when the thunder rolled away, she stepped out into the mist to check for damage. The air smelled heavy, full of wet dirt and moss. The rain had washed everything clean, but the silence that followed felt strange. Even the crickets had gone quiet. She walked her usual route with her flashlight sweeping across stones. The beam hit one of the newer graves, fresh dirt still soft from last week's burial. The headstone had a name she half remembered: Anthony Harper. Aged 27. The flowers were wilted and pressed into the mud. She adjusted them out of habit. Then her radio crackled. It was the two-way handheld the office kept on the same channel as her supervisor, but she knew he wasn't around. He only worked daytime hours. Static whispered, soft at first, then sharper. She raised it to her ear, expecting interference from the storm. But under the static she heard a voice, low, rough, like someone trying to speak underwater. "Help me." Lena froze. She lowered the radio. The air felt colder all at once. Another burst of static. "Help me. Please." She scanned the graves with her flashlight. The beam shook in her hand. The voice had sounded close, too close. She stepped back toward the truck, but the sound came again, clearer now, and this time it wasn't from the radio. It came from the ground. She turned slowly, the light landing on that same fresh grave. The dirt seemed to pulse, a soft shifting like breath moving through soil. Her throat went dry. She told herself it was water draining after the rain, air pockets collapsing. That happened sometimes, she'd heard. Perfectly normal. Then the voice came again, unmistakably human, only muffled. "I'm still here." Lena dropped the flashlight. The beam spun across wet grass and lit the name on the headstone again. She backed away, but something moved in the soil, a hand. Pale fingers broke the surface, clawing weakly through the mud. The hand opened, grasped, and slipped back under. She ran to the truck. Her keys fumbled slick with rain. She locked the doors, shaking. Her breath fogged the windshield. The radio hissed again, louder now, the voice rasping through the speaker. "You buried me." "Wrong." She turned the radio off. It turned itself back on. Static filled the cab. The voice rose through it, not begging now, but furious. "You left me there." The windows trembled with the sound, as if the whole truck had become a throat. Then, all at once, silence. Lena sat frozen, the engine off, rainwater dripping from her jacket onto the seat. When she finally dared to look up, She saw movement in the headlights. A figure stood at the edge of the lot, tall, dark, soaked to the skin. He was turned toward her, but his face was nothing but shadow. Mud streaked down his chest like veins. His arms hung limp, but his hands were clenched. She blinked, and he was gone. Only the muddy trail where he'd stood remained. The next morning, she told her boss, Carl, that someone had broken in during the night. He checked the grounds with her, shaking his head the whole time. No footprints but hers. The dirt on Anthony Harper's grave looked freshly turned, but not disturbed. Probably animals, Carl said, though his eyes didn't match his voice. These new graves settle funny after rain. She wanted to believe that. She did. But as they walked away, she heard her radio, still hanging from her belt, crackle one more time. A breath, long and wet, and then a whisper that slid straight through her. "Don't leave me again." She quit 2 nights later, but the voice didn't stop. It started showing up in other ways. Her phone ringing once at 12:04 a.m. every night, no number showing. Sometimes she'd hear it through the drain when she was washing dishes, just faint enough to make her doubt herself. "Help me. You buried me." Once, while driving home late from a grocery run, her headlights caught someone standing by the roadside. A man, pale and dripping wet, mud streaked across his chest. His face was blank, as if the features had been rubbed away. She sped past, heart pounding. When she checked the rearview mirror, he wasn't there. 2 weeks later, she drove back to the cemetery during daylight. She told herself she needed closure, that it would look harmless under the sun. The air was bright and warm. She parked outside the rusted gates, took a deep breath, and walked in with her phone ready to take pictures just in case. The place looked almost peaceful. Green grass, trimmed hedges, birds chirping. Nothing haunted about it at all. But when she reached Harper's grave, she stopped. The headstone was gone. Only a flat patch of dirt remained. The hole had sunk deeper, leaving a small depression like a shallow bowl. At the bottom of that dip was something half-buried, a radio. Her old one, the same brand and color, with her initials scratched into the back. It was on. Static hissed faintly through the speaker. She knelt and brushed away the soil with trembling hands. The moment her fingers touched the radio, the sound stopped. Then, clear as if someone were kneeling beside her, a voice said, "Thank you for coming back." Lena screamed and dropped it. The speaker popped and went dead. When she looked around, she saw no one, just rows of silent stones. The breeze that passed through the cemetery carried the damp smell of rain again, even though the sky was clean and blue. She turned to leave and froze. Every headstone around her now bore the same name, Anthony Harper, hundreds of them, each one carved with the same birth and death dates, the same short inscription, "Still waiting." She backed toward the gate, not daring to blink. Her feet slipped on the grass. When she looked down, she saw that the earth beneath her shoes was wet, dark, and soft, though there hadn't been rain in weeks. Mud clung to her ankles, pulling harder the more she struggled. Then, faint and far below, she heard him again. "You came back too late." The ground shifted. She ripped free and bolted to her truck, panting so hard she could barely breathe. She looked once in the rearview mirror as she drove off. The gates of the cemetery stood wide open now, swaying in the breeze. And in the reflection of her side mirror, just for a moment, she saw a man walking along the fence line, his hand trailing across the iron bars. His mouth was moving, but his face was the same washed-out blur. She doesn't go near graveyards anymore, not even to visit her parents. But every now and then, when rain starts to fall hard on her roof, her phone buzzes once at exactly 12:04. And if she answers, just once, because she always tells herself not to, she hears only one word before the line goes dead. "Wait." 3 different people, 3 places that should have been safe. Yet something from the other side still found a way through. Maybe some doors stay open once they're touched. Tell us where you're listening from in the comments. And if you enjoy these true hauntings, don't forget to like and subscribe for more nights like this, here on the Black Hour Stories.